Hello, I'm Hannah Taylor, and I'm here with Jordan Myska Allen, and we are talking about the Tao Te Ching, as we can't help but to do every time we're in any way communicative.
Right, we just stumble across it over and over again with each other.
We can't resist but to name the unnameable.
That's right. Yeah. I actually read just recently a really cool um, interpretation of that first chapter, which I know we're not doing that, but showing how that it was almost like flip-flopping line by line from like the kind of like empty to the form, or like the absolute to the manifest, like and back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. Just
Yeah.
dope.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I mean, maybe someday we'll just go through it one to 81 or whatever it is. But today we wanted to talk about verse 29, and I want to share the story of us. Um, we had been at this weekend hackathon talking about our emerging future and like what is the new world order? What is the new paradigm Earth that is here now that we're living into? And there was just this moment, and I had had the Tao Te Ching with me like on my person at all times this weekend, and you had seen me with that. I had read a few verses, and so there was one moment where someone said, "I think we can all agree that we could live in a more beautiful world." And you just looked at me, and you just went like this, and I knew exactly which verse you were talking about, and it was this one that we're going to talk about on this call.
And so I'll read one translation. It's Stephen Mitchell. It's a modern classic, I guess. And it goes like this, and then you'll read another. Do you want to improve the world? I don't think it can be done. The world is sacred. It can't be improved. If you tamper with it, you'll ruin it. If you treat it like an object, you'll lose it. There's a time for being ahead, a time for being behind, a time for being in motion, a time for being at rest, a time for being vigorous, a time for being exhausted, a time for being safe, a time for being in danger. The master sees things as they are without trying to control them. She lets them go their own way and resides at the center of the circle.
Cool. Yeah. And this is verse 29. And in our preamble, before we started recording, you were talking about time. And I forgot that that version has so much time in it.
Yeah, me too.
Cool.
Yeah. Yeah, it's really thinking about it that way. It's interesting to think of like often my default habit is to think of time as one object. And so to say a time is to hold time as like multiple. And I love thinking of it as like there's so many times. Like there's a time for motion, there's a time for rest. Like and to think of motion times as like a single time instead of thinking of it like I'm on one timeline where there's like motion and there's rest. It's like here's motion time, and then maybe I've like cycled back around to here's motion time again. Like it's a really cool way to feel into time.
Mm, mm. Have you seen The Good Place?
I have.
Jeremy Bearamy's, like the timeline just looks like Jeremy Bearimy. And so like all the loops are like times for rest or whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah, so the time and timing, because we were talking about, yeah, there's like time, which is the delusion. My delusion says it's 11:58 a.m. You have a totally different delusion in a different place. And like, but the timing is the assemblage and the convergence of these factors. You, me, Zoom, right? Like our agreed upon delusion diverging in exactly the correct way, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And so, yeah, that timing aspect and timing is that rhythm, right? It is the pattern of stillness and motion. It's the convergence of all the factors in play. So I'm loving drawing that distinction just in general of like what is time and what is timing.
Right. Right. Beautiful.
Yeah.
There's so much we could say about that.
Yeah. So I'll read my version and then well, my version. This is Ursula Le Guin's version. And yeah, then we can compare versions or talk more about time. So she's titled all of hers. Verse 29 is titled Not Doing. How do you decide in the Tao Te Ching which one to title Not Doing? I don't. Anyway, are they all about not doing? Okay. Those who think to win the world by doing something to it, I see them come to grief. For the world is a sacred object. Nothing is to be done to it. To do anything to it is to damage it. To seize it is to lose it. Under heaven, some things lead, some follow, some blow hot, some cold, some are strong, some weak, some are fulfilled, some fail. So the wise soul keeps away from the extremes, excess, extravagance.
Love it. Man, and I just as a meta aside, it's like every time I read the Tao Te Ching, if anyone listening to this hasn't read it, it's worth just taking it. You can read through like a first pass in an hour and a half, 2 hours, maybe even less if you're a fast reader. And even and get a lot from it. And it's worth doing that. Like at least one time, just read it straight through, and then you can take your time and savor and dip and dive. And because every time I read it, like I get something new from it. And so in that sense, and I mean, a lot of good poetry is this way, and a lot of good mystical texts are this way as well, where I mean, and in some sense, the whole world is this way. Like it's just mirroring who you are, and you get to see what you're bringing to it. But when the text is particularly lucid, the mirror reflection is really clear.
Mm, yeah, I agree. And I think if someone had just been like, pick up a version of the Tao Te Ching and read it all the way through, I think I would be unsatisfied with the text. And so I would say, like, specifically, the version that Jordan's reading from is Stephen Mitchell's version. The version I'm reading from is Ursula Le Guin's version. So if you're in our cultural context, in American context, Western context, I would say that we agree these are the two best translations and probably the most accessible. And that brings me to this idea of like, what is normativity? Like, normativity is what we have a common narrative about. And
Right.
so for whatever our normativity is, it's not normal, but we do have these common narratives that are going to make these texts more accessible to these audiences, probably. And then, yeah, I've read some translations that are very obtuse
Yes.
intentionally. And it's like this is like the clearest possible language and it's still totally out there and like so subject to interpretation. So I would say that if you're going to do this and you're going to be like, I'm going to read the Tao Te Ching, pick one of these versions to do it if you're going to do it the way Jordan's suggesting, because um, yeah, it's like it's very, very clear and it's still going to be uh, tricky. Like this one line for me that really stood out as I read this one, those who think to win the world by doing something to it, I see them come to grief.
Yeah. This is what just stood out to me with you reading it. Like that's something that came clear. Is like that I see them come to grief. I'm like meditating on this. What does that mean? And one thing that I take from it is like whenever I try to do something to the world, like given that the world's a sacred object and there's nothing to be done to it, all my effort is it like all the effort and attention and moment that I'm doing trying to do something that's undoable. I kind of in retrospect grieve that I didn't simply enjoy and love the time of the that I had. And even if I was doing something while loving it, I wouldn't grieve it.
Mm.
But it's the fact that I think something can be done, I'm doing it for that aim, that puts me in grief because I'm guaranteed to fail.
Hmm. Well, and there's also this thing where like if we see grief as love, if we see grief as part of the goodness of the world, like the world is a sacred object, including the grief. So you go around and you try to change it. And you're like, I'm gonna change it, I'm gonna change it, I'm gonna change it, change it, change it. And then you get to the world and you're like, oh shit, the grief. And you come to the grief and you're like, oh, this is sacred. If you really come to grief, truly to grief and not suffering, right? Resistance. True grief is so sacred, resonant, real.
There's so much love in it. There's just like I mean that they're inseparable, like in a certain sense.
Yeah, and that's what I say when people are like, "Oh, I wish I could be happy." I'm like, who's happy all the time? The Joker and Harley Quinn, because they're insane.
A friend recommended the Harley Quinn animated series on HBO, and I agree. It's pretty great. Side note. But yeah, no, exactly. There's a kind of insanity, there's a kind of out of touchness. Yeah, which kind of brings back normativity in that sense. Like what is even insanity? I don't know, so I don't want to go there.
Save it for the deep takes on the hot takes.
That's right.
Yeah. Well,
But
I mean, insanity is just this divestiture from, the wholeness, I would say. Like
right.
if we're not willing to account for the wholeness, there's a lack of sanity, I would say. But it's like, this thing where if I want to win the world, if I truly want to win the world, then I better come to grief,
Mm,
right? Because grief is part of what I win if I win the world.
mm, totally. Totally. Yeah, you come to everything. If you've won the world, if you have the whole thing, and yeah, you're gonna have all of it. So yeah, there's a bunch of places I want to go with this, but I'll mention like that line, we both knew that because I meditate on this a lot. To those who think to win the world by doing something I see them come to grief, for the world is a sacred object. Nothing is to be done to it. The same thing, the world is sacred, it can't be improved. Um, and I think about it a lot because I am wired to try to improve the world, it seems. And I'm like, what is that? Is that just like, I have a nose and so I smell, or is that like this like weird shadow that I'm gonna someday, heal or something? And especially with uptrust, where I'm like, okay, I want to somehow change the world in a good way, improve it, um, with the whole way that we dialogue on the internet, and therefore that we dialogue about stuff off the internet a lot of times too. And I'm like, how, like, am I insane? In a very similar way. Am I out of touch with wholeness of like the beauty and perfection of the being as it is? And where I've come to is like two things. One is like before, like I'm kind of on my knees in submission in a certain sense, like maybe, and this is what I've got. And to deny it is worse. This apparently is the way. If that's true, then this is how I'm going to learn, or not.
Well,
Uh,
and you'd have to change some part of the world, aka yourself and your response to the world, in order to make that world perfect, where you're not trying to meddle in it. Wait, like,
that's
ah,
the second piece. Exactly. Yeah. It's like, yeah, of course, it's like what you're saying, but you win grief. Like, what, yeah, I've won that. One of the beings I am is a kind of change being.
mm, mm.
Um,
Well, and the thing about change is that, again, we're back at time,
yeah.
right? So perhaps you're having the perception, right? And it's like that Ram Dass quote, like the world is perfect exactly as it is, including my desire to change it.
Yeah.
And that's what you're reminding me of, which is that only as linearly time-bound individuals can we experience that the world has been one way and now is another way.
Right. Right. It reminds me of like this. I've been reading non-dual philosopher guy, and he points out that like a lot of times like different traditions will, because of the nature of whatever you want to call it, the mystery, the Tao, the Tao that can be named is not the eternal Tao. Like, because of the nature of that, any sort of name, as this whole book starts, this whole set of whatever you want to call it, this masterpiece. it- Anything you pick to try to talk about it is going to reject one side of a false duality. And so there's some, like, one example is like subject or object. Like Buddhists tend to deny the self, but then you end up with a world. And like Advaita Vedantins tend to deny the world and you end up with a self. And so there's something similar happening here where like if you try to like another example, like if you try to deny practice and say, well, like enlightenment already is, like everything already is, um, then you kind of miss out on like the other option, like practice is enlightenment, like Zazen in that tradition. And so in this sense, it's like you can't exactly what you're saying, you can't improve the world. Your efforts to improve the world are the unimprovable world.
Yeah, and the way that you succeed and the way that you fail, right? So some things lead, some follow, some blow hot, some cold, some are strong, some weak, some are fulfilled, some fail, right? And so it's like this is like such a meta text where it's wrapping in on itself as it's like to do anything to it is to damage it. Well, if it's perfect, how do I damage it, right?
Mm. Yeah,
Like and like can I really damage it or can I only damage my experience of it?
right.
And
And
like to
then
seize it is to lose it. And that's the sanity part. Like if I'm seizing the world, then I'm actually losing touch with that wholeness.
I love that line. Yeah, to seize it is to lose it. And yeah, there's something like I can kind of unpack it, but I also kind of can't. Like it evokes in me a sense of how many of the times I've done that. Like this is very common for people in like a when they have like this sense of a oh wow, like I have a moment of awe or beauty or God or Satori or whatever you want to call it. And the moment you try to like, how did I get here? And how can I hold on to it? You've introduced this conception of not now. And then that you can almost feel it fade and you come to grief. And then suddenly you're grieving the thing that your action of trying to grab it, you know, put away from you.
Yeah, it's like getting a ball out of a pool or like grabbing water, it's like I can't, or air. Like as soon as I seize the air in my hand, well, now there's not really air in my hand, right? There's air all around my hand.
Yeah.
So there's something in that where it's like, yeah, the seizure of the grasping.
Right. And so, yeah, it's like, I mean, to speak of an alternative is kind of making the same mistake, but nevertheless, like the alternative is, okay, I am what I am.
Mm,
Here's what's happening and I'm with it and it's going to go. I know it's going to go.
mm,
And the irony is that like the more I surrender into that or let the going go, actually the longer it tends to stay.
mm.
But I'm not doing it because I want it to stay. Um, or else I'm doing the same thing just in a trickier way.
Yeah. Yeah.
And luckily, like that one is easy because life is going to keep throwing me stuff. It's going to keep challenging me. I'm going to keep finding corners of my being that I haven't loved and corners of other people's beings that I haven't loved and that I think are wrong or somehow out of the holiness, the perfection, the sacredness. So it's like I can trust that. And now I'm yeah, not always, but basically overall in a much deeper relationship with like that's going to keep happening. It's going to keep coming, and that's what life is. Actually, parenting is one of the most beautiful versions of this. Like I have some friends that have like full-time nannies, and I don't envy them. And I could see that if I had that capacity, it would be tempting to use it so that I could kind of have my former life more, something like that. But like on some days, like the act of parenting is getting the kids ready for school, waking them up, getting them out, and then coming home and doing baths and dinner and bedtime and story time and all of that. And it's like for better or worse, like the way my life is currently set up, like that actually is a lot of the time we get together. It's not always like a bunch of free open playtime. And it's so beautiful. It's so quality. I don't want to be outsourcing that to someone else.
Yeah. Well, and this is something that I've been teaching in Village Principles, which is like, what the fuck is free time? Like time is spending. I am doing something.
Yeah.
Free time.
Yeah. Yeah,
Either
that's
it's all free time or none of it is, right? And we were talking about freedom too in the preamble to this. So yeah, free
right.
time. Whew.
It's either all or none of it is. And that's it. That's where like the circle, goes around back to itself. Like either one is fine as long as we know that they're the same.
Yeah. Yeah, big time. Well, and I'm really now that I'm reading this, like those who think to win the world by doing something to it, nothing
Yeah.
is to be done to it. And so so much of what I'm teaching in the Village Principles is about working with life and being in a reciprocal relationship and empowered. I would say that the definition of empowerment is life is happening for me and with me. And the
Right.
hallmark of disempowerment is life is happening to me. And it's just as disempowering to be like, I will happen to life or to you.
Right. And even more so, like I want to add to that as me. Like I am the world and I am life. Like there's no separation whatsoever. Like what? It's so yeah, there's something yeah, the other one says something, if you treat it like an object, you'll use it. There's some fake pretension that I'm somehow separate from things.
Ooh,
And this has to do with time as well. Like for me to think that time for me to think that when I'm like, oh yeah, it's something when I construct time as a thing at all, I'm somehow outside of it. And then or the objects like the coffee cup is somehow like timeless, that's happening in time, or this object is happening in, and I'm like, no, that's not real. Like time is interwoven. It's like time is everything. Everything is time. Like there's no the cup is time. Time flows through it. It came into being and it will decay. And it's moving and I'm moving it and like what? And same here. And there is something like we all have this experience, especially as we age, of like it's as if my sense of me is the same, although the body and stuff changes. And so the idea that there's like a thing separate from time, it makes some sense, except that even that separate thing is in relationship with time.
yeah. The way that I explain time, especially for the feminine, I explain it like the mycelium, right? So, like, there's this overlay of the mycelium. Let's say that the mycelium's laying over the ground, right? And I'm like a little mole tunneling through the ground. And it's like the mycelium is always already everywhere. Like, if my life was a movie, all the same things happen in it. But, like, if my life was a movie, it really appears that one thing led to another,
Yeah.
right? But like what's true is my whole life has already happened as it's happened in a way. And like yeah, so there's this like change or not change, or like there's this kind of like we are doomed to be evolving, right? And we don't need to go and do something to evolve, right?
Right.
And this
Right.
is so true of building relationships too. And I talk about this all the time, and you and I have vibed on this that like
Yes.
what do you mean build a relationship, right? We are
Yeah.
relating.
Yeah. Totally. Yeah. Yeah, totally. I mean, yeah, we've talked about this with love too. Like, and it's cool. It's actually really cool because you and I have the way it's shown up in our lives is very different forms.
Mhm.
I'm in this like, um, you know, one-on-one marriage partnership where I guess you would say we're monogamous, but like that, the way that the marriage entered, it's not like, how do I say it? Like calling it monogamous is almost like giving too much deference to some alternative. Like it's not that wasn't a thing in the thing, like um and yet my actual attitude is very, very similar to yours, where I'm in like infinite loving relationships with everyone. I'm literally in love with the whole world and every being in it. I mean, there's some that I really don't like, but I'm still in love with them.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, and that's the thing where it's like because it's sacred, liking it or not liking it has really nothing to do with it. That's my
Yeah,
position in time as I'm moving underneath the mycelium, which is already always wherever it is, right? So it's
yeah,
like if the timeline simply contains what it contains, and I'm just going to arrive there at some point in my life, that's how it feels to receive feminine wisdom, like as a woman. Because, like, as a woman, I'm not feminine energy, right? As a woman, I have feminine and masculine because I'm a person, I'm a body, right? And the binary is yeah, like I keep being called when you talk about leaving the oneness behind for the distinction, or leaving the distinction behind for the oneness. It's like I say that union is the relationship of distinction and oneness.
right, right.
That distinction fuels connection, And connection is the only thing the oneness cannot have as oneness.
Right.
It can't have experience, it can't have connection because two things connect. One
Right.
thing does not connect.
Yeah, and I mean, well, it reminds me like the early God. Well, let me pause Plotinus and the one and the many for a second. And just there was something that you said that I wanted to like. I feel this inspiration to make it really practical. Like, what does this actually do for me? And I imagine it does it for you as well. Is like I am deeply compassionate towards myself and to others because I'm like, it's totally fine. Like, and I run into edges for sure, but for the most part, like I just have kind of an infinite well of, you could call it patience, but it doesn't feel like patience because again, that kind of demands a time perspective. And um, I'm like, yeah, like if I hate this person and I know that I could find a deep forgiveness and I'm not there yet. And I'm going to take the time that I need to take. And I don't need to push myself. I don't need to force myself. I trust that it's going to happen if it needs to happen. And I trust that it's fine if I die and it doesn't happen.
Yeah, yeah. And that's true non-duality, right? The non-duality is this equanimity that says, oh, that sucks. That sacred thing sucks. Oh, this sacred thing is great, right? It's like
Exactly.
duality says sacred, unsacred.
That's right. Yeah. Duality applied and twisted is like I'm supposed to not have preferences or something. Like what? No. Like of course I have like there's certain foods I like, there's others I don't like, there's flavors I like, there's people I like, there's others I
You don't
don't.
have to because the world is infinite. How else would you select and process if everything was equal? Like, how boring. What's the point?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I can actually show up very, very lovingly with people I don't like or I don't want to spend time with. Like, and I am in deep acceptance of like, oh, they're here and sometimes I realize that I have to ask them to leave for whatever reason, and it's all just part of that play. There's a time for hating things and loving things, just like there's a some blow hot and some cold.
Yes. Yeah. And my roommate and I met at 2 in the morning, like down in the house, like, I don't know, like impending sense of doom. She had a dream, like I was just awake because that happens to me. And she was telling me about her dream. And then she was like, is this okay? And I was like, it's here now. She's like,
Yeah.
is it okay for me to bring it in? I'm like, but it's here. Like,
Yes,
you
yes.
don't, okay, take it away. Like, what do you mean? What? Like, okay, I agree. Take it away. Give me a different reality. Like, what?
Yeah. Yeah, and like this happens a lot where people will ask this kind of thing, is it okay? And what I translate that to is something like I am not used to encountering people who I can trust to maintain their own boundaries. And so I'm trying to do that for you right now. And I'm like, I get that. I really get that.
Yeah. Yeah. And I find myself making that check as well with other
Yeah,
people, that because it is uncommon to have other people holding their own boundaries. And then even the people who know they can hold their own boundaries will often hesitate to do so without clear a clear knowing that that's what is happening,
right.
right?
Yeah.
If you're like, ooh, I really want it this way, but like, is Hannah gonna misinterpret that? And I'm like, hey, your boundaries are cool with me, and you're like, okay, she's not going to
Yeah.
misinterpret it as like something other than my boundaries, right? And so it's like, yeah,
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And so yeah, I end up actually just naming a lot of that in advance. It's like that's my trick. Instead of asking for permission, I pre-give it or something like that.
yeah. I used to be better at that. I've been just so in the I'm like, we can be messy. We've all got our boundaries so we can be messy, but the intentionality is, yeah, really, really good.
Well, ideally, it's exactly like this is saying, some are strong, some are weak, some fulfilled, some fail. Like, there's a time for being messy, there's a time for being clean. Like it ideally we have the freedom to be like, oh, just so you know, at any point you can tell me to fuck off or stop. And like that's great. And there's a time where that's just not nice and that's not appropriate, doesn't feel good, it doesn't do what it's actually setting out to do. It's a grasping it in a way that loses it.
Yeah.
And so what I want, what I'm training in a way, accidentally slash sometimes on purpose, is like the real freedom to say yes or no to those capacities at any given moment as is called for.
Mm. Hmm. And that's the abundance of boundaries is that if our normal boundaries are set to our absolute utmost luxury, fucking cross them 6 times. I don't care. Like,
Yeah,
cross them 6 times, I'm still comfy. I don't like it, but I'm not at risk.
that's right.
And
Oh, this reminds me, actually, this is cool. A friend was like, "Oh, I'm reading Hannah's boundary course, abundantly boundary course, because he recommended it, and it's so good." And she quoted you on this part where she's like, if I keep getting overwhelmed, it wasn't quite what you said, but if I keep getting overwhelmed, I'm probably showing up for a bad deal." And she's like, "This happens with my kids all the time. Am I showing up for a bad deal with my kids?" Okay, cool, yeah.
oh, you can absolutely show up for a bad deal with kids. Yeah.
Keep going. Tell me more. I'm just.
Well, I think like this also goes back to the time thing, but it also links into the next thing I wanted to say, which is the anything, nothing, everything. I call that the existential empowerment triangle. So we have victim, perpetrator, rescuer, which I would call the disempowerment triangle. Some people call it violence, some people call it drama triangle. For me, it's the disempowerment triangle. When life is happening to me, I am giving resources from a state of disempowerment, aka victimhood. I am getting resources from a state of disempowerment, aka perpetration, which is as sneaky and simple as I'm really sad right now, Jordan. You have to come and talk to me. Perpetration. That is perpetration.
Amen. Oh my God. And the people in the circling world, especially, but also relatefulness, whatever, absolutely need to hear this and like internalize it. Like it's just because you're using the so-called conscious language, NVC has the same problem. Like I don't mean it as like a unique problem. It's a problem of humanity, and any system can't avoid it. But it's just like, wow, that is you can't just use a set of rules and expect that our sneaky disempowerment won't find its way through. We have to actually find empowerment.
Yeah. Well, and that's why my village principle number one is I am the one. And the first thing I say about it is you can corrupt this principle by thinking of it as you are the one. If you
Yes,
ever put it in second person, you've corrupted it. And that's the
exactly.
thing with Byron Katie's work and NBC. It's like if you are asking someone else to do it, you have left it completely.
Yes. Yes. Right. And there's all sorts of nuances we could go into about that. But like this is one of the reasons why I love I lead once a week, no matter I have since 2012. Like it's like, that's if I'm in town, I'm showing up to church essentially. And it's a relateful studio and it's my community and it's super nourishing and grounding for me. Thankfully, it also is good for other people. But like I really come in being like, this is for me. Thanks for showing
That's
up.
empowerment. That's empowerment, right? This is for me, with me, co-created by me. I'm in collaboration with it. That's empowerment. And disempowerment is the world is happening to me. And so rescuing is the third thing with the disempowerment, where I need to fix what's wrong here before we can get into empowerment. And that's the rescuing part. And then the empowerment triangle is like anything, we have to try anything. And this is what applies to kids. Like kids have to try anything. And we're like, we cannot tell them, especially when they're pre-verbal, that stove is hot. They either find out or they don't, right?
Yeah.
They either find out or they don't know. And that's the anything part where it's like, we can't be told what it's going to be like. We have to try anything. We have to feel what arises within us and try anything. And anything is what might happen in the world. And this is the thing that frees me from the workshopping of the emotions. I'm just like, well, here I am feeling this now because anything has happened in the world and
Yeah.
everything is possible. It all came from nothing, it all goes to nothing. So that's the empowerment triangle of anything, everything, nothing that takes us out of blame entirely. Because it's like every time I want to blame, I'm actually a victim of anything and everything and nothing. That
Yeah.
is what's happened. So then when it comes to kids, this whole like showing up for a bad deal with kids, I mean, it's like parents don't even see the premises they've set with their children,
Yeah.
right? And one of the biggest ones is like, my child shouldn't be crying.
Right.
And this is where we all as adults get to this place where it's like, my emotion is an emergency. Well, your emotion could be an alarm for an emergency, but your emotion itself is never, ever an emergency. And if we talk about the most extreme somatic disposition that an emotion can send us into, we're talking about a panic attack, which is survivable.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
So this thing where I'm showing up for a bad deal with my kids, like I have set up a bad deal wherein they know I don't want them to cry.
Right. Totally. Totally.
And so, I see this with my friends' kids, they'll be like, but I'm getting upset. I'm getting upset. And as a parent who's dealt with this child since they split your body open or something, it's like a different thing where you're like, oh God, one more thing, one more emotional overwhelm. I can't,
Yeah.
okay, like I gotta negotiate. I gotta like stop this because it really is a problem when the baby's crying at first, and so it transitions out of being a problem and into being a really inconvenient annoyance, whatever. But this idea that when kids understand that mom or dad is afraid of me crying or wants me to not cry or is threatened in some way by my extreme emotional position, then my emotional expression is a currency. And when I see this happening with kids, I just look at the kid and I say, it's okay to cry.
Yeah.
It's okay to feel sad and to cry and maybe even to yell. And then they're
Yeah.
like, well, what do I do now?
Yeah. Well, you just took away the very tool I was going to use to get what I was expecting to say. Yeah, exactly. And like like I'm very sympathetic, like especially with like you said, it's splitting open your body, or even as like as dad, like I feel it. I'm very sensitive and I'm very empathetic, and like I sometimes have to remind myself. I'll get suddenly worked up when my kids are getting worked up, and I'm like, this is my feeling. It's happening in my body, and I don't mean to, you know, not take responsibility for it, but sometimes I'm like, oh right, like it's just completely fine. I can just breathe, and like maybe they can catch some of my regulation as well. And that's a thing. But then, yeah, like because of that, like this kind of sympathetic thing that's happening, it can be it's a very masculine thing, I think. Like to be like, it's okay to cry. I'm gonna witness you and be with you. And I'm not gonna give in. Like sometimes it's obvious, like when like literally Jack is like, people use this as an example, but like he literally be like, "Can I have ice cream for breakfast?" And I'm like, "No, you can't." And so this happened last night. He was like, "I want to watch TV," and he was so tired. And I was just like, "We're not watching TV tonight." And he was like, I'm like, I get it, bud. It's tough. I'm gonna watch TV after you go to bed. You have to go to bed now. And it's hard. I'm like, I wasn't gonna give in, but there's some quality of like and actually what it is being with my own, there's a wild discomfort in my own body, mind, emotion system that I'm witnessing in myself. I'm like, yeah, I'm with him, but like I'm like, it's okay for me to cry internally as I'm like telling him no.
Yeah. Yeah. Or externally, even. And
Yeah.
this is a child influencer that I follow that I love, Kels What Else on Instagram. I just love her videos, all of them. But one of the things she says is that when your kid is insisting they want something and you don't want to be in the power struggle, you want it as much or more than they want it. So they're in the
Right.
back seat like, I want chocolate. And you're like, oh, I want chocolate, right?
Yeah.
And so you
Yeah.
can really go there. But what you're reminding me of is something that, yeah, that our nervous systems do resonate.
Yes.
Not optional.
I know. I think the idea of co-regulation is a little weird because I'm like, is there an opposite? Is there actually a regulation that's somehow individual? I've never seen it.
Yeah, so what do we had monogamy, which we're giving gives too much premise to the opposite. We have patience that gives too much credit to the opposite, and now we have dysregulation or regulation, which gives too much credit to the opposite. And it's like,
Yeah, apparently I'm in a
well,
thing.
world is world, right? I've been saying this to my friend who is she just moves through the world as if the world is made Leela. She moves through the world as if the world is made of world. And so when I see her, it's not like this thing is like good or bad or useful or dirty, right? Like clean or dirty. Like those distinctions aren't always arising for her. And I'm like, yeah, you're just in world is made of world mode, right?
Yeah,
Like
yeah,
just,
exactly.
yeah.
Yeah, it's so freeing, it's so recommended. And like for me, it's been an incredible um journey to get to that simplicity. And yeah, so I don't know why, but that's what's coming up now is to speak to that. Like this, in a way, this is just describing what the world is. This verse 29. It's literally just true in a certain sense, and in another sense, it's like an ideal, like for us to align with it and recognize and remember that. And there's some sort of like honoring I want to do for like the struggle of like, yes, it just being in touch with this is just way fucking better. And I understand it's really hard.
Well, but even that is a fractal of trying to bend me, the perfect world, part of the perfect world, into this thing that understands the world is perfect, right?
Yes.
It's like
Yeah.
that's still like we just get caught in these traps again and again, and that's the bitch of it all, I think. Like
Yeah.
that's what it is to be dealing with a deep truth or an existential matter. It's like anything I say about it traps me in the thing.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. Right. And it's a mistake to not say anything though, because you have this like there's a time for saying stuff and there's a time for being silent. Um, yes, whatever. I keep trying to reference that, some are fulfilled, some fail. Like the wise soul keeps away from extremes, excess, extravagance. I'm not always talking about it and I'm not always staying silent. I'm allowing whatever's needed or wanted or true or real or here to come and show up.
Yeah, and it's like a tree that sprouts a new branch or a blossom or a fruit. Is that doing something to the world? You know,
Right.
and that's what really arises in me. What you're talking about is this arising that like I am going to be naturally moved to be a contributor in the world. And that is my sacred contribution. And then there's also this thing where I can lose the plot and get all caught up in the doing of things. And
Yeah.
really, I'm just excusing myself from the presence. I still can't really harm the world by doing that. I harm
No,
the
exactly.
experience of the world.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah, exactly. And then you'll come to grief.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that'll be fine because that's going to be what it is. And in fact, and maybe you could even think of it as like whatever not being with the world you accumulate while you're not being with it, you'll luckily it's stored up for you in the form of grief. And so you'll get to experience all of it whenever you're ready for it.
I love that premise too, Jordan. I love that. Thank you for bringing that in because people are saying like, "Oh, I'm avoiding it." I'm like, "You're saving it for later."
Yeah.
In your body, save it for when you feel like feeling it. It's
Exactly.
genius. Genius that you can bypass your emotions. It's a superpower.
Oh my God, yes. Yes, yes, yes. Yeah, exactly. And great. The same, yeah, it's the same thing. This is another thing that came from parenting. Like I got in a habit, which is a very cool habit, which I recommend for everyone to move through a stage, if they haven't, of being able to address everything right as it comes. Like, okay, oh, there's an upset. Let's talk about it right here, right now, and clear it or finish it or whatever. Not necessarily process it. We can talk about that. But like, like if I'm, don't pick my battles, like I can just face up to stuff as it's here because that's what's here and I'm honest. But with parenting, that's not always advisable. Like I actually do need to pick my battles. Like sometimes like shit needs to get done. Lunch has got to get made for the next day. There's, kids need to take baths, need to go to sleep. And so it's like, no, actually we don't have the time and space and energy and we're not available to like
Mm,
work out this interpersonal difference. And so we need to table it.
mm,
Maybe we need to table it for a couple of days,
mm.
however long we need until we have the time to like get into it. And this was a big shift for me. It felt a little at first like I was going back in some direction. And maybe I am. I don't really understand direction in terms of the growth trajectory in the same way that like, yeah, the flower, what direction is it going? I don't know. It's going in the form of more flower. I guess. I
Is it
don't
in the
really.
process of flowering or the process of withering?
Yes, yeah, exactly. So yeah, I withered a little and I'm grateful for it because it's way, way more wholesome. It embraces more.
Well, and this kind of brings us back to this, like what you're describing with Jack wanting to watch TV at night. It's like with especially with really young kids, and he's 3,
Yeah.
especially with really young kids, but I noticed this in myself because I'm still a young kid in there too,
Yeah.
is
Yes.
that the thing is not about the thing. Like it can seem to adults as we look at children that they really want something they're not getting, and we can be in this shifted premise and show up for the bad deal that it's about the thing,
Right.
when really it's about their ability to express this emotion. And what do I need to look for in the world to validate this emotion?
Yeah.
What can I say? That right there is why I'm pissed off.
Yeah.
And so for me, because I did Byron Katie's work and a lot of CBT while I was working in juvie, right? It's like, separate the thoughts, the behaviors, the actions. Well, what I found is I have all the emotional experiences, regardless of whether I have a narrative that makes them make sense. And then,
Yes.
oh, interesting. Narrative was actually a really comforting and fun thing because now I'm just anxious, 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 anxious. It's like, why? I don't know, right? So,
Yeah.
but I'm willing and able to feel the somatic experience of that. And that's why the narrative doesn't have to arise. But a child, we're always asking, like, what's wrong? What do you need? Why are you doing this? Right. And they're like, well, I guess I need a reason. It's because I can't watch TV.
Yeah. Yeah. Right. And even sometimes it's like, well, the reason is like they can't articulate this, but like the reason is I need to know that you still love me while I have this emotion. Like okay, now I know I have the emotion. Can I also be in relationship with the emotion?
Mm.
And so there, yeah, the great irony is that like that, like what you're saying is like it's okay to be sad or it's okay to be angry or throw a tantrum or whatever it is. Like, and this is not to say like sometimes I'm like, I don't want this kid to be in a tantrum. I think they're in a loop, and I'm like, let's go outside. And we go outside. And I'm like, look at that hawk. That's cool. Like, there's ways to calm a kid down without telling them to stop feeling. You can be like, I'm like, okay, cool. Like, yeah, you're crying, you're upset, you want to watch TV. I understand. I'm gonna hold you, not gonna make that wrong. And you want to go outside? Let's go outside.
Well, I talk about my friends when I share my emotions with my friends, they make them worse until they go away because emotions are guaranteed to pass. And so this happened last night in our household, one of us is feeling very like I'm too angry with the world to be pleasant to interact with, right? So
Yes, yes,
she's around and I'm like, oh, she's just the wench that takes care of the dog, don't mind her, right? And so just kind of like leaning in and like getting
yes.
in, like, oh, you're unworthy. Okay, you're unworthy, right? And then it just can't survive that level of validation, that level of endorsement. And that's the thing that we find often when we give in to kids is like we give them the thing they want. Does it stop the crying? Not 100% of the time,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
Giving
yeah.
them the thing doesn't necessarily give them the thing, and that's how we know it's not really about the thing.
Yeah, this thing I sometimes will teach this as gassing up. Like we'll gas each other up. Like you have a little fire going, let me pour some gasoline on it. Like and it's really hard for some people to do. Some people are natural and it's really good. But like it's very hard for people to do it. It feels like they're crossing some boundary or like there's some sort of like weird meme that got into culture. Like I'm not allowed to um like go into like a deep but I don't really know what it is, but it's so good. Like, yeah, if you're like
I
if
noticed
you're
this with my 8-year-old cousin just said something about his older brother, like 2 years older brother, that like was just true objectively.
yeah,
And my cousin's like, "Don't you say that." And I'm like, "Okay, so you just reinforced his passive aggressive statement." Instead of saying like, yes, X is objectively true. Is there a problem with that? Like, well, he's being like some, so I'm like, how young my family learns this passive aggressive
Yeah.
digging where we're just stating a pure fact of what's happening. Like, this is a fact, but if I say it in a shitty enough voice, everyone knows I mean you're bad for this, right?
Yeah, yeah,
And
yeah.
then everyone just addresses my intention instead of the facts of what I'm saying. Whoa.
Right. And yeah, so even this I want to gas up. Like, yeah, like what a fuckhead. Like that's such a bad person for like doing this fact. Like we should probably all exile him for at least 20 minutes.
Exactly.
And like and when I'm saying it, I'm just saying it. Like I don't really have people are like, oh come on, like that's some sarcastic. And I'm like, I don't know, maybe it was. I think I just was kind of getting into that and pushing the extreme a little. What's it look like? What's it feel like? Let me go there.
Yes, well, and it's like when we have the little suggestion there, then we let people run with the suggestion, and it's almost like suggestion of violence or suggestion of sexuality, how that's used in movies to like send our imagination somewhere. You know, it's like they start kissing, they lay down in the bed, and then we pan to the candlelight, right? And then
Exactly.
you're supposed to just take it away with whatever you think happened there, you know? And so there's this thing with this type of insult where it's like, but this happens inside of me with fears. I'm like, what if the threat? What if the threat? What if the threat? And then if I actually go, okay, what if the threat?
Yes, yes,
If I actually have to name it, it starts to get very ridiculous very fast. But
yes.
I can fear the threat and the abstraction without ever defining it. I can just go on fearing
Yeah,
it.
yeah, yeah, exactly.
But
And
it
it takes,
is this, it's a flavor of sarcasm that you're talking about. And I've been told that this is my flavor of sarcasm or the best flavor of sarcasm, where I'm just like calling out the underlying belief.
yeah.
And I'm like, oh, so this is true. And they're like, ah, no.
Yeah, yeah,
Oh,
yeah.
interesting.
Yeah. No, exactly. Yeah, I actually learned about a version of this reading an old 60s um book called When I Feel Guilty, I Say No. When I Say No, I Feel Guilty. It's like an old pop psychology book from the 60s, and it's great. And they have this technique that they teach called fogging. And I sometimes will teach people it's literally exactly what you're saying. Like you're just agreeing with what was said. Like
Mm,
you can like and they do it to the extreme where like if you were like Jordan, you're a Hitler supporter, then let me just find some way that's true and agree with it. Like,
mm. Byron Katie teaches this too. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah. She says, like, you know, her ex-husband comes in the room and he's like, what are you doing, Kate? What's the matter with you? And she's like, can I just find an answer to that question? What is the matter with me?
yeah, yeah.
Matter with me right now? There could probably be a matter with me right now. What is it? Oh, I thought you shouldn't be shouting, but you were. That's what
Yes.
the matter with me was. Now it feels better. Thank you.
Yes, yeah, yeah, exactly. Yeah, and there's this kind of playful fool like dual quality to it where it's like I don't have to decide whether I'm being genuine and earnest in the question answering or sarcastic. I'm kind of neither in both. I'm kind of like Schrodinger's like good guy, bad guy or something. Like because like and 'cause I don't know. I like that. I like being able to hang out in that place of like, yeah, I don't know. I guess what's wrong with me is I thought you shouldn't be shouting at me, and here you are. Like, am I teasing my husband or am I like genuinely answering his question? I mean, yes, neither. Like, I,
Well, and it's so much in the tone, right? Which is why my little cousin gets redirected for just saying the truth because he's got this shitty tone that means, something else. And the tone is really, really, that's my what I'm about, the tone situation. Because emotionality, right? This emotion of like unworthiness or the emotion of confusion or the emotion of joy, it can be like, I want to get away from this wave of confusion and get onto a wave of joy. And it's like that is no way to navigate a ship. But
yeah,
for me, it's the tone of love, which the tone of love is like, huh, I wonder what that's about. It's expansive, it's relaxed, it's accepting. And then the tone of fear is like, why would you say that? No, get that away from me, right? And so those are my north and south in terms of navigating this ship that is me, this seaworthy vessel that can handle every emotion. I could have a panic attack again and be okay. because
Yeah.
panic attacks are not lethal. Like the outer edge of my emotional expression is totally survivable, feels like it's not. Just like so many emotions feel like they're not survivable. I've
Yeah.
gone through 100% of them. Every single person has.
Yes.
Um, and then, yeah, it's like, what do I, like, what do I navigate with if I actually know that I don't need that I'm not at risk by feeling anything. And I had a
Yeah.
lover be like, "Oh, should we avoid you feeling some humiliation?" And I was like, "What weak ass shit do you think we're building here? Like, you know, avoid emotions? What? Ridiculous. Let's lie to ourselves." Yes.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, there's a time for lying to ourselves too, but in playfully invoking the Tao. But no, I think what you're saying is really one thing that's really important and it's implied in that is that you have fully investigated and loved and welcomed those states inside of yourself.
Mhm.
And that's usually why people don't find much support in like in an average community for like self-loathing and confusion and all sorts of negative emotions, but also the like the really positive ones, like you're saying, joy, ecstasy, pride, exultation, turn on, whatever you want to, whatever, like these extremes, like for the most part, these feel threatening to people, and so they haven't dealt with them, and so when someone else is in them, they try to fix and they make a problem that they then have to fix versus being like, yeah, this is human experience. This is what's up. I've been there. I know that. I'll go there with you right now because I'm sure there's more here.
Big time. Absolutely.
And it's like you're not threatened by being unworthy, which is not to say that you assume you're worthy. Like you're in the field beyond Islam and unbelief. You're like, huh. It's okay. I'm okay whether I feel worthy or unworthy. And so I'll go there with you. I can exacerbate that. I can play with it because I'm really free.
Yeah, well, and this thing where like some things are strong, some things are weak. According to what? According to what? According to what? Worthy according to what? Like, how could I possibly be worthy? Oh, what a burden. Thank goodness I don't have to be worthy. Like, thank goodness I'm unworthy. And guess what? Still have all this shit. Ooh, ooh. Don't have to be worthy, it turns out. Don't have to feel
Right.
worthy, certainly.
We were talking about existence. Like, yeah, you're not worthy to exist. You do,
Just
undeniably,
do.
already, right here, right now.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
100%. Mm.
And weirdly, I must know what it's like to not exist because I can sure sense existing, which demands that I also am sensing not existing.
Mm. Well, yeah, perhaps, but it could just be exactly like the fear of the threat, where I think what I'm imagining is not existing, but I'm imagining the threat of not existing. I'm not
Hmm.
actually imagining the reality of not existing. And this fear of the threat, that's what was used to control me as a child is fear of the threat, right? Like, you do this thing or else. And I never asked, or else what? Or else what? No, no, I don't want to know, right? I'm
Right.
happy to just fear whatever your threat is. Like, I don't need to know the details here.
Yeah.
And I think that that stays with us from childhood if we get it in childhood.
Yeah, 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 totally. Totally. Totally.
What do you think? Does that feel like a good closer?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. Yeah, let's do like one more sentence on like the master sees things as they are without trying to control them. Because you were saying that like not doing was the Ursula title. Which is also in a sense like not controlling. And I want to say to like want to bring up control for a second, even though it's been implied, I think in basically everything we've been saying is it's like your fear of threat was a way that your family was trying to control. And this is a way of doing something to the world, not like with, as, through the world.
Yeah.
And again, like I understand it. I get it. Like it's tempting. And I try to control the world here and there.
I mean, it's a delicate thing. You can't not control the world. I mean, your car's part of the world. Please control that. I would really love for you to maintain control over your flailing arms, for example, right? Like,
Yeah, yeah.
so yeah, there's this sense of there's something other than control. There's some sort of participation that is a command and a stewardship, but isn't necessarily a doing or a controlling.
Yeah, and I really like the metaphor of the flower in bloom. I like using this as well, where it's like, who I think a lot of spiritual people get into this weird idea that it's all about them, and then you get this weird kind of Instagram narcissist spiritualist, but you also get the weird idea of like, I'm not supposed to have a self or an identity. And this would be like a bud being like, I shouldn't bloom, I shouldn't blossom. Like, like, and it just doesn't make any sense. Like the whole existence of a flower is blossoming. And similarly, like the existence of people is like peopling and whatever that means. And I don't know what it means. I don't know what it means for me or you until I'm doing it.
Yeah. Well, and there's something Newtonian about the control, the object actor. That's so Newtonian, right? So, and that's like making the world an object, treating the world like an object, right? Is like that I am an actor, and then there's just this object, right? And then sometimes I'm the object and there's an actor. When in fact, what we have is anything, everything, nothing is a co-arising reciprocity at all times. And this is what I see when I look at the river. I look at a river eddy and I'm like, why that? Why that? Why that? What's causing that? How come sometimes the river splashes up and sometimes it lies flat in that place? Like, what is going on?
Yeah.
Shouldn't this be consistent?
Yeah, yeah. It's wild. And there's some, yeah, I'm thinking about that also, like in just walking, the sheer act of walking. Like we do actually control the ground and build flat floors and stuff like that. And for better and worse. But we definitely don't want to like pave the entire universe to make it flat. Like that's horrible. And so yeah, there's something like it's like, well, what's the option? What does it mean to see things as they are and let them go their own way? Um, and it kind of just means to walk. Like walking is never the same. The river is never the same.
Yeah,
It, I'm poised. I'm not controlled when I walk, and I am, and I'm not.
yeah.
So yeah, it's easy to get lost in the philosophy, and I like these images of blossoms and rivers and walking because it's like it really is here already. It's the stuff that we're already in and as and of.
Hmm. There's a Benita Roy YouTube video on animism, and she talks about how she's looking at the field of her horses at the place where she keeps them. And she has this perception that the grass is growing horses.
Yeah,
Is it not? It
yeah,
reminds me of Ender's Game, the Ender Quintet, actually, too.
yeah. No, I know this feeling. I mean, I I sometimes think, yeah, like are we like you think of like we think of bees as pollinators. Like are humans or are we pollinators? Like we've done some incredible work for potatoes, especially a particular kind.
Yeah, the russets. I'm trying to,
Who's
but then
using
it's like,
who?
but then it's like the russet like is like, hey yo, I have the toughest skin, like you should really cultivate me, right? And we're like, russet, you got some tough skin right there. And so it's like, yeah, as according to how things suit our needs. I've heard this too about viruses, that viruses have some drive to spread themselves, and that's why they make us cough on each other,
Mm.
right? Like genius symptom, because you
Yeah,
could just give me a fever and then I'm not spewing your replicants
yeah,
all around.
yeah, exactly.
So good.
Good fun. It's good fun. I love it. I love you.
I love you. This is delicious. I love talking about the Tao Te Ching.
Yeah.
Someone who gets it.
Yeah, it's yeah, I love it too, like bringing in these specific moments from last night and parenting and uptrust. Like, thank you for the invitation to do this, and that I don't know that I would have taken this hour to apply the Tao Te Ching to my life today, but I have thanks to you.
Mm, thank you. Yeah, that's really special to me. And I just adore you. And I adore that our minds often go in like the same places. And then it's like any place your mind goes that's different from where my mind has gone. It's like, oh, a secret cave that I'm gonna love and I didn't even know about, you know?
Yes.
So I just every familiar idea is such a comfort, and every new idea that you present is such a comfortable refuge for me as well. So thank you for your intellect and brilliance and
Likewise.
yeah.
Yeah. Such a delight.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool. And then I'll see you in a few weeks at Relateful Camp.
Yes.
We're gonna be camp buddies, camp buddies, camp buddies. Okay, don't sing on mine, Hannah. You don't want that. Okay, well, I'm gonna end our recording. Thank you all for tuning in if you did.
Yeah.
You did. If you can hear this, you tuned in. Thank you.